Okay, so let's continue our discussion of the land of Israel. We're going to look at probably one of those famous Rashis on all of Chumash. It also happens to be the first Rashi on Chumash. And let's see what Rashi has to tell us. Quite extraordinary, actually, if you think about it. Especially, most importantly, by the location of this Rashi. Let's turn to page, if you don't mind, 40. Page 40. We spoke about how the promise of the land of Israel was given to the Avot, Abraham, and then again to Yitzchak, and then again to Yaakov. We said because each one needed their own promise, so that they knew it was coming directly through their family line. Then it was promised to Moshe Rabbeinu and the Jewish people, because he had to persuade them to leave Egypt. And one of the ways he did that was to promise them a land flowing with milk and honey. That means things are going to get better for you, but you're going to have to make this big leap into the desert. Then Yoshua had to lead the Jewish people actually into Israel, because Moshe Rabbeinu was not allowed to enter into Israel, right? Because of the sin of Mem Riva, hitting the rock. Let's go back to the beginning of creation, which is a strange place to discuss Israel, because there isn't even a world yet. And yet we know the Pasuk says, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. In the beginning God created heavens and earth. Look at this Rashi. Rashi quotes Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. We're not too sure who this Rabbi Yitzchak was. One opinion is, anybody know? It was Rashi's father. Well, we know his father's name was Yitzchak. I've heard actually it's probably unlikely it was his father, but some say it was because before he started commentary on the entire Torah, he wanted to give Hakarat HaTov to his father, therefore he quoted his father at the beginning of the Chumash. Some say it's unlikely that it was. Anyway, whoever this Rabbi Yitzchak was, Rashi realizes that this is someone important enough to begin the Torah with. Lo hayat tzirich latchil et Torah ella mechodesh zelechem. Says Rashi, the Torah did not need to begin with the story of creation. Why not? Why not? Because there's no mitzvot in the story of creation. There is just creation. Therefore, says Rashi, most famously, why does the Torah not begin with the first mitzvah? And what is the first mitzvah that was given to the Jewish people? What was the first mitzvah that was given to the Jewish people? HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. That you have to create a calendar and track the months. That was given to us not at Har Sinai, not even in the Sinai desert. It was given to us while we were still in Mitzrayim, because we need to start counting 49 days in order to get to the month of Sivan, where we receive the Torah. So a very famous question, Rashi. Why are we beginning the Torah with all these stories of creation and the Avot and the Imaot when we just start the Torah with the first mitzvah? The Torah means Horah. It's all about the mitzvot, the teachings of the... So why start at that point? Fair question? Oh, it's not my question, it's Rashi's. That's what he says. Shehi mitzvah rishona, because this is the first mitzvah. Shenistavinu ba Yisrael, that the Jewish people as well. Now, there were mitzvot before, right? We know Brit Milah was given to Avraham Avinu, and Peru Avur, according to many opinions, goes back to Adam Rishon. Whether that was a bracha or Peru Avur was a mitzvah is a dispute, but whatever, whichever you want to look at it. But this is the first mitzvah to the entire Jewish people. He says, you want to talk to the Jewish people? Start at Har Sinai, or start in Egypt, and that's the end of it. Why start this whole story of creation? Why is it mentioned? Great question, really weird answer. And Rashi gives the following answer. If you never read this Rashi before, read it with me now. Mishum, because. And he quotes King David in Tehillim, weirdly enough, to prove his point. Koach ma'asav higid le'amo. Because he wanted to convey the message, which David HaMelech mentions in this verse, that God is very powerful in his acts, and he wanted to give them, letet lehem nachat goyim, a piece of land that was possessed by other nations. What? What's he talking about? Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Torah Torah creation? Because there's going to be a piece of land which doesn't exist yet because the world doesn't exist yet. But this land is there to tell the world that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is powerful and makes decisions about all land. Land that God created. Hence, this is the interpretation of the first pasuk, which is creation. She'im yomru umat ha'olam. Because if, I would change the word im personally to matai, but he's leaving it, which means when, but if, in other words, this keeps happening to this very day. If the other nations of the world, Omrim, say, Lisra to the Jewish people, listim atem, you are a bunch of, listen, what a listim? Robbers, thieves. Really? Me? A thief? I'm a good Jewish boy. I always make brachas. I always do good things. No, you bunch of Jews. You thieves. Well, what do we steal? What do we steal? Look at Rashi. It's unbelievable. This Rashi could be written yesterday as a comment on the New York Times. Listim atem, shekavashtem arasot shivat goyim. You stole the land that was inhabited by 7 nations. Not 70. There are 70. People always confuse these two concepts. So let's just separate them out now. There are 70 core nations throughout the entire world. 70 core nations. There were 7 of those 70 were residing in the land of Israel where the Jewish people entered at the time of Yeshua. Right? Actually, there were probably 10, because Avram was promised that 10 lands owned by 10 nations will be given to us. We only got 7, which means 3 more are yet to come, and I think I mentioned, and we'll see later on, 3 more will come when Mashiach comes, which is where the land of Israel is going to be much, much bigger than it is now. Imes Hashem. Although my kids and I, we can't move to Israel, not enough room. There's plenty of room presently in the land of Israel for all the Jewish people. There's only 15 million of us. And the land of Israel, for the most part, is uninhabited. The Golan, the Negev, plenty of room. But anyway, it's going to be much bigger anyway. So, back to our story. Says Rashi, there's going to be a time where other nations are going to be like, you stole our land, you thieves. You were not living there. It's true, we weren't. Who's living there? 7 nations. What right do we have to go in there and say, oh, ever since then, the land belongs to us? Yep. By the way, nowadays, it doesn't have to be non-Jewish nations. It could be Jews. It could be ice cream manufacturers. No, such a land. It could be anyone you want. But the Jews sometimes are the most vocal about this. Ironically. Hem omrim lehem. We answer. This is the answer we're meant to give them. Well, my Rebbe used to say, it's not for them. It's for us to answer ourselves. We need to know that this is the answer. Alright? Because this may not work for them. That's what my Rebbe used to say. But Rashi is phrasing it as actually saying to them, Vehem omrim lehem, kol haaretz shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu hi. The entire world belongs to God. Hu bara, God created the universe. V'natna lasher yasha benav, and He gave it to whoever He decided was fit to get which piece of land. God decides who gets what land. It's His world. He created it. V'ratzona natna lehem, and God decided to give it to us. V'ratzona nachla mehem v'natna lanu. God gave it to them, the 7 Canaanite nations, and then God decided to take it from them and give it to us. So what's the answer Rashi is giving? And why does he mention it on the first pasuk of the Torah when there isn't even, forget the land of Israel, there isn't even a planet, right? What's going on over here? Anybody? What's our right to the land of Israel? It's not rhetorical. Somebody please answer me. You can say it. Yeshiva University. It's not Michigan University. Thank God. Yeah. Or Princeton. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that Hashem created the world. It says that Hashem created the world and that He has the ability to give it to us.
That's
and
right.
He chose to do it.
God decides. That's basically it. Not so complicated. Very simple Rashi. First Rashi on Chumash. The Torah begins, just think about it. The Torah begins with the land of Israel being given to the Jewish people. Weird, right? That's like the first thing, right? Talk about kosher, talk about Shabbat. This predates everything. God created the world with a piece of land in mind. This is Rashi. Remember, Rashi is giving us Pshat in the first pasuk. Extraordinary. It's very unlike Rashi to do this. And he's like, oh, you want to know what this pasuk's all about? This pasuk, God created the heavens and earth. Torah starts there. So you know the land of Israel belongs to you, the Jewish people. That's all right, the land of Israel. Because God says so. Something I say to my kids, why do we keep Shabbat? Because God says so. Right? Anytime a child doesn't know the answer to a question, because God says so. In this case, they're absolutely right. Because Hashem says so. And that's good enough for us. Is it good enough for the Goyim? Well, the God-believing ones probably could have been at some point, but most don't believe in God anymore, so what's the difference? Yes.
Isn't it also to show the Jewish people that the land could be taken away from them at any point?
Ooh, wow, yikes.
And that it's not necessarily like ours.
Yeah.
We have to like earn.
Yeah. There are three things considered a matanah given to the Jewish people. A matanah could be returned, could be taken back. Because it's a gift. If I give my kids a gift, like I could give my daughter a car, which we didn't. We make her pay for it herself. Even though she smashed us. But we'll leave that aside. But a person gives a gift, a precious gift, if they misuse it, it can be taken away. Because there comes a responsibility with that thing. There is a big responsibility that comes with it. All of Galus is going to come from the misused responsibility of the land of Israel, and that's being driven from the land. Yeah. Actually, the expression is a lot worse than that. How does the Torah describe the expulsion of the Jewish people from the land of Israel if they misbehave on it? Very, very graphic description. The Torah itself gives us. In Parshat Kedoshim, Yokid Yoshvia, the land vomits out its inhabitants. Very strong language. It's like the land is alive. What does Rashi say on that? Anybody remember the Rashi on that one? Vomits out its inhabitants. The land of Israel is like a sensitive stomach. It doesn't tolerate sin. And just like a sensitive stomach can take in food that it ends up expelling, vomiting out, so too the land of Israel has a chis, has a certain life. If the wrong ingredients go inside it, it spits it out, Jew or non-Jew, by the way. The Sheva Goyim, the seven nations, the seven nations, they were bad. It got to a point where Kodesh Baruch had to remove them. Anyone know who actually was preventing? We mentioned this already. Who was preventing the Jewish people from overtaking the land earlier? Eov. That's Rashi's interpretation. Yeah, he believes he was around that time, and he was one of the righteous Gentiles in the land. But yeah, it got to a point where they don't merit the land anymore. Lo aleinu, right? Because we want to keep the land of Israel. We're going to see that the mitzvah of the land of Israel, and by the way, we're going to see that the redemption must come from the land of Israel. All these stories of the messianic drama and Olam Haba take place in Israel. In Israel, there's no Mashiach, right? Just makes sense.
So then isn't the process of Mashiach already starting? Since we have the land?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
1,000%. 1,000%. If you ask other people, now the world, even the Haredi world is moving into that realm. They're beginning to accept it. But, having said that, there were times we had the land of Israel, and Mashiach didn't come. So it's a bit tricky. There is one difference today, though. First of all, we'll see a number of signs, which I'm going to give you, fascinating ones, besides the fact that we have the land of Israel, actually about the land, what's happening in the land of Israel. We'll see from the prophets and the commentators that show there's a number of things happening right now which show that Mashiach is very, very close and is at hand. There's a feeling of that. The entire world feels that. Even the Goyim feel it.
So then why is there certain Jews who are not for it?
That's to do with the Zionistic movement and their repulsion of that, and not being able to appreciate that we have the land of Israel now, even if they live in the land of Israel. It's become politicized, unfortunately.
Because it's not like they're just not for Israel, like they'll wave the Palestinian flag too.
Okay, these are insane individuals. There have always been people among us, even at the times of the Beit HaMikdash, who self-sabotaged any success that we have. There were sikrikim. People used to burn houses of food and stuff so that we could go to war against the Romans. There's always been nut jobs among the Jewish people. But then you're asking me. But that's what I believe. Well, I'm going to give you the evidence. You can do what you want with it, all right? Let's say I'll be all like PC. I'll give you the evidence. I happen to believe absolutely Mashiach is very, very close. I'll show you clear signs that we're seeing. Everyone feels it. Even the goyim feel it, right? Everyone feels that something is cooking. Okay, fine. So we see the land of Israel has a clear mention of the Torah, promise to the nation, to Klal Yisrael. The prophet Joel, who we're going to visit again later on when we talk about Mashiach, he says, chapter 4, verse 2, V'kabasti et kol hagoyim, I'm going to gather all the nations of the world and bring them down to the valley of Yoshaphat, or wherever that is, and I will contend with them concerning my people. Why? Because we're going to see they've been dispersed and divided up the land, but the Jewish people are going to return and possess it. The land of Israel is clearly a possession of the Jewish people. I bring that up for a few reasons. So that's that we're going to regather there, which we'll discuss when Mashiach part of the course. But we see the land of Israel is the inheritance of the Jewish people. All of it. All of it. Okay? So what's unique about the land of Israel? What's unique about it? So the Pasuk in Devarim tells us, now this appears in Devarim because Moshe Rabbeinu gave a 3-week speech, I think it's for 3 weeks, or maybe a little bit less, which is Sefer Devarim. And he's telling the Jewish people about the land they're about to enter. And he says, Ki Hashem Elokecha meviach el Eretz HaTova. God is bringing you to a good land. Eretz Nachle Mayim. Right? He's kind of trying to take them in with his words. They're about to go into Israel. They're about to fight wars, except the first battle. The first battle of Yericho, they didn't fight. The Jewish people would always realize that Kadosh Baruch Hu fights all our battles throughout history. So the first city they went into, Yericho, no battles. They walked around, blew shofars, Kohanim, walls came tumbling down. All right? Great. But after that, we had to actually fight wars. How many years did we fight the wars when we first entered into Israel, the time of Yoshua? How many years? Anybody know? 7. 7 years of Milchama, of Kavisha, and then 7 years of Chalukah, of dividing among the various tribes. 14 years altogether to settle in the land at the time of Yoshua. Okay? 14 years. But there was 7 years of fighting. So the Jewish people were nervous. He's like, don't worry. I took you out of Mitzrayim, and I told you, it's a good land, flowing with chalav and devash. You've got to find what the chalav is and what the devash is. This is what you think it is. But anyway, but we're also, at the time it's about to go in, they're nervous. These are the children, right? Now the adults of that original redemption. And he's going to talk to them about this land itself. And he's saying it's a good land, Toiva, Eretz Nachale Mayim, Ina, right? Inas v'tamot yosim bikal bahar. You're going to see water is coming out from underground in the valleys and in the mountains. Eretz chita, wheat, usora and barley, the gefen, and there's grapes, te'ena, and there's figs, the rimon, and there's pomegranates. Eretz zayit, we got beautiful olives there as well, right? Udavash, and there's Deitani asher eretz asher loy b'meskanot tochal b'lechem. Nothing is lacking there. Whatever you need in the land of Israel is there. Moshe Rabbeinu talking great praise about the land. By the way, he learned a lesson. Who spoke lashon hara about the land? The Meraglim spoke lashon hara about the land. Yeah, and that kept us out. We're going to see there's a strong connection between lashon hara and being kicked out of the land of Israel, or being kept outside the land of Israel. Lashon hara can bring Galut. That's why we still Lashon hara was the Avera. Sinat Chinam was the Avera that destroyed the second temple, yeah? And that kicked us out. That's what the Chavetz Chaim says again and again and again. Lashon hara keeps us in Galut. Lashon hara and Galut are connected. Lashon hara and Galut are disconnected. In your books, which you all have, the textbook, you'll see there's a chapter on Lashon hara, because the two are very closely related. Whenever there's Lashon hara, there is sinat chinam, and there is expulsion. Just the way it is. Always there. Okay, anyway, so this is a place, Avanei Barzel. This is not a natural place. If you look at it, the stones are iron, right? Umarea, tachstov nechoshet, and the mountains are like copper, they're like nechoshet. V'achalta, but still, v'achalta, you're going to eat. V'savata, and you're going to be satisfied. That actually means drink, by the way. Uverach Hashem Elakacha, and you're going to bless the Lord your God. Allah Eretz HaTorah, which God gives you. Wow. What is this? Eretz Zivat Chalav Udavash. Zivat Chalav. Says the Gemara, the name of Rami Bar Yechezkel. Ikle lebnei Bara. By the way, one side point, I must mention this. I did bring the Gemara down. This idea of speaking Lashon about the land of Israel is a big, big problem. You know, the Gemara tells stories of people, great tzaddikim, would walk around the land, listen to this, picking up garbage from the ground so that people wouldn't say, ugh, Israel's dirty. Can't say about the land of Israel. It's the gift. Can't talk smack about Israel. There used to be rabbis used to give, I think Rabbi used to give classes, probably Hanasi would give classes in the shade so that people wouldn't say, oh, it's too hot here. I should talk about the land of Israel? Can't say about the land of Israel. They'll be careful to say anything nice about the land of Israel. All right? I'm just saying what the Gemara says. Anyway, so he's traveling around, he went to Bnei Barak to get a bracha from some Rebbe. No, I'm just kidding. And he saw goats eating under the fig trees. Well, let's just do it inside. Levanak, Hazanu Levaneo Ir the Kachlan Tute Vete'enei, goats eating figs, sitting under the fig trees. Or Natif Duvsha Mite'enei Vechelba Tayef, and he saw that the milk was flowing from the goats and they mixed together. Bahadi Adadi means together. Va'amar Hainu Zvat Chalav Udavash. This is the land of milk and honey. The milk is the milk of goats, and the honey is not the honey of bees, but that probably includes it, but is the honey of figs, which makes sense because figs are one of the Sheva Minim.
I thought it was dates.
He says figs actually. Yeah, it does actually say dates elsewhere, but the Gemara says it's figs over here. Yeah, I think so. Did I translate it correct? Yeah, ta'nei, ta'ena. Yeah. Maybe it's good that it's figs so that we, the Jewish people, can figure out what to do with our lives. See what I did there? That joke. Okay. The land of Israel. I mention this now, although it seems historical, and I'm going to bring a piece of Josephus down, but we're going to see from the prophets, and we'll see why later on, that one of the signs that Mashiach is coming is the blossoming of the land of Israel. I mentioned signs, that's one of them. And the prophets are very clear. Isaiah and Ezekiel are going to say very clearly that you know Mashiach is coming when you see the land of Israel blossom. There's a strong connection between the Jewish people residing in the land of Israel and the land giving its fruits. We'll see that. I'll show you those prophets inside. I mention that now because we know that when the Jewish people are doing well, we get a promise. It's good and it gives off milk and honey and vegetables. It's all beautiful. It's a good sign. And it was that way. And in case you think, well, Israel's always that way, Josephus tells us, well, originally it was. He says in the Jewish wars, the whole area is excellent for crops and pasturage and rich in trees of every kind. Right? Its fertility invites people to come work the land. Every inch of it, the land of Israel was covered in fruits and vegetables, right? And there were beautiful cities full of thousands of Jews before this is right before the destruction by the Romans, who came and destroyed the land of Israel. Jews kicked out, it turns back into a dust bowl, unfortunately. Turns into a dust bowl. Big problem. Big, big problem. When Mark Twain wrote in the late 1800s his visit to Israel, he describes it, and he liked Israel, he liked the Jews, right? I think there were even, I think one of his kids married a Jew, I think his daughter married a Jewish boy or something. But when he speaks about the land of Israel, he says, dry, barren, nothing grows in here, because the Jewish people are not residing there. Yeah? So there's a strong connection. Mark Twain wrote about The Innocents Abroad. He writes a whole piece about that. I don't bring it down because I don't care. But it's interesting to note. So don't think it's always, there's always been fruits special with Israel. No. There's a direct connection with the Jewish people on their land safely, having this wonderful time. It says in Maharsha, look at this amazing piece on page 42. The fertility of the land of Israel is dependent on Jewish presence. Right? Even Gush Katif. Here's something political for you. Gush Katif, which is, historically speaking, the only time I can ever think of when any nation has kicked their own people off their own land. It's absolutely absurd. I can't even, but whatever. It's so absurd, it must have been a Shemayim in some way. The only time in history where one nation goes off, even then it was so fertile, Jews left, nothing coming out of there. Alright? It's like a...
Which area?
In Gaza. Gush Katzeh, right? Anyway, says the Marashah, another even pieces of Israel. As long as Israel does not dwell in its land, the land is not going to give its fruits. Look at this. There's a deep connection between the land and Israel are one. As she is accustomed. When she will begin to flourish, however, and give her fruits, this is one of the sources, but this is not a prophet. I'm sure the prophets say this. This is a clear sign that the end, the time of the Geula has come. Aval, kashetachzor, when we the Jewish people return to Israel, liten peratea, it's going to give its fruits. Zil ketz megu'ula. This is the end of Galut. Shekarev lovo, zman geula sheyachzur Yisrael al admatan. The Jewish people return to their land. So the land of Israel blossom, give its fruits. Is a clear. Where does he get this from? Marsha. He's not a prophet. He gets it from the prophets. We'll see those prophets later. Okay? Now, the land of Israel also has a very interesting trait, which is described in a number of ways, in a number of places. Rashi mentions that the land of Israel is higher than other lands.
Oh, yeah.
It's higher than other lands. Now, we have to understand what the word higher means in this case. He learns it out from a pasuk in the Torah, where we know when the spies, the Meraglim, took the fruits from Israel to the Jews in the Sinai desert, where they all were, it says, they came down to us. So they left Israel, and they brought the fruit to outside Israel. It says they brought the fruit down. Didn't have to say that, could you say they just brought us the fruit? Remember they brought the fruit, right? The big grapes. Yep, and the fig. And they brought fruit. Why do they bring it? To show that the land of Israel is being massive people live there.
So when the Meraglim brought the fruit?
Yeah. Right, now God Baruch Hu set it up that way so they could bring them. What a great land. What do? They spoke bad about Israel, talked smack about Israel and said, oh, it's a bunch of freaks the size of this fruit. It's terrible. Even sometimes something amazing for you. If you want to, you can make it look bad, yeah? You know what I'm talking about? Even the greatest bracha, and you're like, oh, that's terrible, and that's what they did. That's called the un-hakarat hatov, the ungratitude. Side point. Anyway, so we learn from that pasuk, says Rashi, Magid, what does this tell us? They brought the fruit down. Why does it they brought the fruit down? Sha'eretz Yisrael gavo mikol arasot. The land of Israel is higher than other lands. Really?
What does that mean?
What does that mean? I don't know. What are you asking me for? No, we'll see two interpretations. What do you think? We'll see two interpretations of this. What does that mean, higher than other lands? Come on, people, wake up.
Spiritually?
Spiritually higher.
Closer to Hashem.
A what?
Closer to like Shemayim.
So that'll be spiritually higher. Yeah.
The world was created from there.
We know that the average seer was actually created, the world's created from there as well. Gives it an inheritance Kedusha, that's true. The world did start, maybe that's why Rashi mentions it on the first pasuk, because the land of Israel was the source of all creation, right? From Harabayat actually, from the stone over there. Okay. Anything else?
Physically.
How can the land of Israel be physically higher?
Walk around.
Are there higher mountains?
Yeah.
So how can you say that? They're going to say that, by the way, but how can they say that?
What do you mean?
How can you say the land of Israel is higher when it's not high? The lowest part of the world, ironically, is the Dead Sea. But how can you say that it's the highest part? Love the Dead Sea, by the way. Oh, I love it. My wife doesn't like to go in. She just likes swimming in chicken soup. I'm like, what's better than swimming in chicken soup? Amazing. I'd love to live there. So quiet and nice. David HaMelech did. Good enough for him. Good enough for me. Okay. Yeah.
Didn't we say that like the temple has to be on the highest?
The temple, David HaMelech chose it. But we're saying it's the highest point of the world. Okay. Oh, definitely the region. But you're right, David HaMelech did create the Beit HaMikdash in the highest place, where we learn, from this prayer class. That's why the halacha is, synagogue has to be the highest part of the city and the highest building in the city. Right, that's true, yeah. I see where you're getting with that. Yeah. Now I talk about the actual land itself. So the Marashah says, the highest is actually in the physical sense. Physically. But how can that be? Beit HaMikdash gavo mikol Eretz Yisrael. We know the Beit HaMikdash was in the highest part of Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael gavo mikol Eretz. We know the land of Israel was higher than all other lands. Sha'olam hu ketapuach. Because the world is like an apple, which is the ancient way of saying the world is round. Round. It's a sphere. Right? Umakom Beit HaMikdash shu merkaz ha'olam. And therefore, both are viewed as top of the sphere. Israel is considered the top, right? And then the Makom Mikdash is considered the top of that. It's like a mountain on a mountain. But how can you do that? Because it's a sphere, which means there is no top or bottom. What's the top of a ball? It's all relative. You can decide what the top is or what the bottom is. I mean, we put it down to put, the North Pole, the South Pole, top, but that's just how the cartographers, I believe I remember that word, and map makers decide to depict it. But we don't see the world that way. We actually see the world as Israel on top. But even geographically it makes sense. If you look at these old maps that I have on the Jerusalem, you see this old map, I used to bring it down over here. You see actually depict the world as petals on a flower, right? Different, each of the continents is a petal, and Israel in the middle. Do you know where that would be? Not just I'm talking about physically speaking, not just like spiritually speaking. They used to depict Israel as the center of the world. In this case, referring to as the highest part of the world, because it's the entry point from east to west, you see. See, even in terms of that, there's an entry point between both sides of the world. But we see it further. We see HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world from this point, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees the land of Israel. He's understanding Rashi that way. The land of Israel's on top, because it's all subjective what you decide to put on top of a globe. We see Israel on top of the globe. So when it says making aliyah, or they came down to us, it's literally physically referring to the land of Israel being on top. That's how we see the world. And everything that leaves Israel is a yurida. That's what the pasuk says. Yardu aleinu. They came out of Israel to us in Sinai, and they came down. Right? That's the Marashah. The Maharal disagrees. Or maybe he doesn't disagree, actually. I used to say that. Maybe the Maharal is saying, well, the spiritual is a reflection of the physical, or actually the other way around. The physical world is a reflection of the spiritual world. So that's true physically. But there's an idea that's coming to us. Yeah? Listen to this Maharal. The Maharal comes on a statement in the Gemara. The land of Israel is higher than all other lands, and the temple is the highest in the land of Israel. The Zeki Eretz Yisrael Kedusha. This has nothing to do with the shape of the land of Israel. It's to do with the Kedusha of the land of Israel. Mikol Ha'arsaf, from all the rest of the world. The land of Israel is Kadosh. And we define the word Kadosh as separate, distinct, apart. Or Beit Migdash Kadosh Mikol Ha'arsaf. And the holy temple was holier than anything else in the land of Israel. The Davar Shu Kadosh, and we know whatever is Kadosh, Elyon, is higher. V'chomrei, and that which is physical, Hu Shafal, is low. So that which is Kadosh is always higher. That's what you see in the Torah, right? When something is being taught and given over, it's from a mountain, and the desert, considered the lowest, that's a place of spiritual death, he says elsewhere. So he's kind of fitting in with the rest of his thinking. Therefore, af im tomar ki kol haaretz hu kadur, and if you want to say, right, even though we know the world is a sphere, like a ball, like kadosh shav kol sad, and a ball is equal on all sides, right? Nothing gives it precedence over another piece. Yochol liot harosh b'chol makom. You can make the top any place, right? Min hakadosh from the top. Mikol makom, that's the two mems. Mikol makom, nevertheless. Mikol makom, nevertheless. Yesh la niach rosh kador Eretz Yisrael. best to put the top of the Kador as land of Israel. Mipnei, midregat kedushata, because of the holiness of the land. That's why we're doing it. That's what allows us to see the land of Israel as the highest place, says the Maharal. Because it's holier and greater than the rest of the world. And that is why. Yomar kashehi lech el Eretz Yisrael hu oleh. This is where the expression comes. You move to Israel, you're making aliyah. Right? Where does it come from? Well, geographically you may be going up, but again, maybe again you live on Mount Everest and you're going down. That makes a difference. We see the world as being the land of Israel on top, and that which is higher is a representation of spirituality in connection to it, and therefore you're making a spiritual uplifting of yourself. You finish yourself. And then you ascend to the Beit HaMikdash, right, which is in Yerushalayim, which is higher, and then you ascend the mountain to Beit HaMikdash yourself. You're going up, 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 up. That represents the kedusha of that place. Yes, Miss Brenda.
Then why is the Dead Sea
So low?
Yeah.
You want an answer to that?
Yeah.
I asked that question to a great rabbi, who was my Rosh Hashiva many years ago, Rav Mendel Weinbach, Zecher Tzaddik Levracha. He said to me the following answer to that question. I asked him the same question. I said, why do we have the lowest part in the world? Well, he always said to me that the highest always can lead to the lowest, right? Ironically, you actually get to see it in Eretz Yisrael. The highest can also live. The world is created as like a parabola. The highest potential leads to the lowest potential as well. But there's something unique about the Dead Sea. Why is it called the Dead Sea?
Because nothing lives in there.
Why does nothing live in there? Because it's salty. He says, what's the spiritual root of that? He said, I think he put it in one of his books as well, that he told us, going back 35 years now, he told us because the Dead Sea only receives. If you're always taking, you don't bring life. So you see the route to death, right? Because nothing lives in the Dead Sea, it's so salty, although it's still part of Eretz Yisrael, but it's the taker. That which gives remains sweet. You would think, wow, it should be the sweetest thing. It's taking all the water from the entire country, right? The lowest place it gets to receive it all. If you're just a taker, you're bitter and nothing can live in you or with you. But if you're a giver, you get to be sweet. Isn't that nice, Paul?
So
Yeah? Cool, right? That's why it's the Dead Sea. It only takes and doesn't give. That which gives is the ability to be fresh. Having said that, I love the Dead Sea. Nothing makes me happier than floating in it. Let me just picture that for a second. 1 second. Oh, that felt good. Oh, God. Woof! I've been to Israel a long time. This is the problem. C'est problème. Not a coincidence, by the way. Think about it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu closed the door to the Jewish people for a long time. It's insane. I'm just letting you know, that's crazy. Okay. Okay, fine. So what is the purpose of the land of Israel? Why do you even need the land itself? Right? Why do we need the land itself? Okay, what is the purpose of the land? Actually, I want to answer another quick question, which relates to this. If Eretz Yisrael is so kadosh, which we just said, let's write this question down, which is a secret code for, this is probably in your midterm. Why was the Torah, you're not helping, why was the Torah given outside the land? That's a good question, right? Now we saw that Rashi, we see the Mefarshim, we see the Maral, we see Rishonim, Acharonim, Gemara, Pesukim, Israel, Israel, Israel. And like, where do we receive the Torah? Yeah? Where do we receive the Torah? Sinai. Where is Sinai?
Egypt?
No, it's not in Egypt. We left Egypt. Torah could not be given in Egypt.
I thought it was in Egypt.
Nope.
Desert.
In the desert. In between.
But isn't that modern day Egypt now?
Actually, no. We had it, and then they had Torah, but back then it was open land. Open land. We know why in a desert, Right? This whole thing on the Torah, you should be hefker, like a desert, belongs to everyone. But why was the Torah given? Wouldn't it be better given in the land of Israel? Has anyone heard this question before? Isn't that a great question? What's the answer? Elishava, hit me.
I think it's pretty obvious that like the Torah will be observed in Israel, but since we are in Galus for a while, it's important to know that the Torah has to also be observed outside of Israel and
That is Rabbi Hirsch's answer. Rabbi Seinfeld Hirsch says,
just keep the Torah.
had the Torah been given in Israel, what might you have thought? Quite understandably, but incorrectly. Understandably, but incorrectly. What would you have thought? That the Torah, you would have thought, put it in inverted commas, Torah only for Israel. That's what you have thought, which makes sense, right? American law. Where does American law apply? Only in America. For example, how old do you have to be to drink alcohol in America? 21. What are you all laughing at? Right? That means none of you over 20 has ever tasted alcohol, obviously. Except you, Elisheva. You're over 21?
Yeah.
Go enjoy yourself. But for the rest of you, little children, but if you go to England, where the legal age is 18, we're very quick on that one, right? How many nations of Israel? No idea. How old to drink alcohol? 18. They're very quick on that one, I tell you. They're a little quick on the uptake over there. So I try to discuss what a kazayas is. It's like a shot cup. Yeah, I know that exact size. You got that? Shot glass. Yeah, shot glass. I know the exact size. I'll give you the measurements myself. How the Torah, same thing. So the American law applies in America. You know the Torah law only for Israel. That's not right. Therefore, Rav Hirsch says the Torah was given outside of Israel so that Torah is for everywhere. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew that we'd end up in Galut, and we'd have to have Torah, and the laws of Torah are not limited to the land. So you have Torah. Within Torah, you have this piece called Israel. We're going to see the best place, the mitzvah to work more of it. We're going to see a lot more. But ultimately, right, the redemption is going to come from Eretz Yisrael. Right? This whole end punchline to the story of creation, which started in Gan Eden, is going to finish in Eretz Yisrael. That's where we're going. That's why we're discussing Eretz Yisrael on a Mashiach course. It's going to end over there. But don't think Torah is limited to that one place. The Torah is bigger than any one location. We're clear on this. Because the Torah is going to be the Jewish people throughout the entire where they are. Land of Israel was taken away from us. Even Hebrews, the Torah is always with us. It's a portable reality. Which is why the Ark always traveled with us, right? Yeah.
I just have a question on that one. If the Jews are supposed to be in Israel,
Yeah.
then why?
The ideal location is for the Jewish people to be in Israel.
Right.
Yeah.
Then wouldn't only being allowed to observe the Torah in Israel keep all the Jews in Israel?
No, because we went into Galut, we knew we were going to sin, because of our sins, Galinu me'aratzinu, we were kicked out of our land, and what are we left with? We're going to see a wild Ramban. I'm going to show it to you inside. It's a short piece. Nachmanides Ramban. He's going to say, does anyone know what the famous Ramban in this piece is that Elian is touching upon?
Yeah.
He says the mitzvot are only for the land of Israel. Only for Israel. What are we doing mitzvah outside for? So we go back, yeah?
Because it's important to like learn them and know them beforehand, because we can't just like all of a sudden like
When Mashiach comes, exactly, we're going to turn up like, what's tefillin? What's Shabbat? He goes as far as to say the mitzvah only doesn't mean you don't get rewarded outside, and the Ramban lived most of his life outside. He only got to move to Israel at the end of his life, and then died there. There's a schut to die in Israel, by the way. Never mind just to be buried. There's an opinion that even to die in the land of Israel, let alone to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. Let alone to be buried. There's actually a girl in my other class says, I'm not going to be here. My grandfather died in Morocco during COVID, and we're transporting him to Eretz Yisrael. I have to go. Very well, right? It's a schut to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. The land itself is kadosh. The land is kadosh. We'll see something else. Anyone know the famous Rashi, why he should be buried in Israel? So I'm jumping off a little bit. I don't know, very scary Rashi. I have no idea what it means. When Tches HaMesim, you live outside, you're rolling in tunnels under the Rashi says this. Rolling in tunnels under the ground till you get there. I don't like roller coasters. I think I'm buried in Israel. My grandmother's Har Zaytim. Big schut. Big schut. My grandma, my grandparents, on my mother's side, are buried in Har Zaytim. Yeah. Not been there for many years. Terrible. Yeah. Eretz Israel is the best place of mitzvot, but the Torah is given outside. The Torah is an international reality. Okay? Any other answers to this question? Yeah?
I feel like it wouldn't make sense to give the Torah when like Bnei Israel didn't say yes to the invasion. You know what I mean? Like
That's a good. I never thought of that. We had a choice, right? And we said Na'aseh v'nishma. Had to happen. He said like, but Hashem knew we were going to say yes, right?
it was still I don't know. That like takes away.
I want to say like preparation. Certain mitzvah, the Torah to be given to us as preparation beforehand, because the mitzvah begin once you got the Torah, right? And actually, let me ask you this: what percentage of the mitzvah can only be kept in the land of Israel? That's a great question. That is a great question, if I say so myself. What percentage of the mitzvot can only be kept in the land of Israel? We say in Hebrew, talui ba'aretz. What percentage of the mitzvot, of the 613 Torah mitzvot, can only be kept in the land of Israel? Give me a percentage. Shout it out, don't be shy. 30? That's a lot.
20.
10, 20,
Also 5.
52! 52% of the mitzvot are talui ba'aretz. Crazy, right? Imagine that. Think of all the king mitzvot, Beit HaMikdash mitzvot, Shemitah Yovel fruit, all that kind of. It's Eretz Yisrael. We're an Israel-based religion. So therefore, before we get to enter the land, we have to prepare ourselves in order to figure out what to do. Because once you get in, you're getting busy. Right? You got the land, you got your massage, you got all this stuff to do. So if we get to that point, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu downloaded the mitzvot early. That's not so weird because we know HaKadosh Baruch Hu downloads certain mitzvot before Har Sinai. I don't know which mitzvot Hashem downloaded before Har Sinai. Shabbat. It's given in Mara, right? A week or two before, whatever it was, right? Because there's so many laws they had to prepare. Kosher wasn't, which is why they had to figure out what to do. That's why we have Milchik on Shavuot, right? Because kosher animals, what's going on? I got non-kosher pots, how do I kosher them? And all that stuff. So preparation, hachana. Prepare yourself before you go in. But this is the piece I wanted to speak about. Land of Israel's kadosh, but the Torah has to be given outside so that the entire world can be influenced by the Torah that was given outside. Yep. There's probably many more answers to that question. You can think about it. Yeah.
I just have a question. How did the whole world hear about it when they got into it?
Everyone knew about it.
It was like in the middle of the desert and there was
They knew about all the miracles in Mitzrayim too. It got out. Every water in the entire world split at that time during Kriyas Yamsuf. They knew, they went out. Amalek knew they came out. Yeah. Somebody tweeted it. I don't know, some primordial tweeting or something. Got out. Everyone knew about it. Everyone knew the Torah was given. According to us, every nation was offered the Torah and said no. We said yes. Right. I mean, the Bible still is the biggest selling book of world history. I don't know, did Harry Potter take over yet? Probably will one day. Okay. So what is the purpose of the land of Israel? Why do we need it? Why do we need land at all? I call this let's have some fun. I used to call this the 3L theory of Judaism. The 3L theory. And then every time in this class, someone adds another L. It became 4, and then 5, then 6. What are the 3 L's? We have the land. That makes a nation to a nation. The land is Israel. The law, the Torah. Right? What was the other L? Land, law. The law is the land, the Torah.
No, the Lord.
Oh, the Lord. I never thought of that. Yeah.
That's what you said.
That's a good one. No, I didn't know it. The law, L-A-W. The land, the law. Oh my God, I forgot now. The land of Israel, the law, the Torah. Oh my God, that's crazy.
What is it? What's the?
No, I just made it up. Well, I'm just saying, what makes a nation to a nation?
Just now you should be the law.
The
No,
laws?
if you were like a couple of years ago.
Law?
We did the law.
Law.
A life, right? You could say that. Someone once said in class, locks. Jewish people have locks as well.
Love.
Love, ahava, v'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, b'chol lavcha. Yeah, love as well. Yeah. All right. But a land seems to be a major part of, right? Every nation needs a land. But the land of Israel, and this is the key point, seriously speaking, the reason we have the land of Israel is not just because we need somewhere to live, right? Or like Herzl described it as a safe haven. Actually, not being so safe for the Jewish people in Israel, right? There's got to be a higher calling that comes with it. There's a, well, you land, you need a safe haven, right? He had the whole Dreyfus affair, you've done this in Zionistic studies, right? He saw Jews being attacked, we need to go somewhere safe. By the way, what did he first say, Theodor Herzl? What was his first location he wanted? Uganda, and then Argentina, right? We complain about the heat, imagine. He just wanted a safe place. It wasn't that for us. The Jewish people never saw it as a safe location. That's not where we handed it. The land of Israel is Kadosh because it's the place we do mitzvah. Look at Devarim. I'll show you the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, top page 44. And he says, V'zot ha-mitzvah, this is the commandment. V'achokim ha-mishpatim, and the laws and the justices. Asher tzivah Hashem Elokechem, the Lord your God is telling you, l'lamed otam, to learn them. V'lasot ba'aretz, and do them in the land. The best reason to live and reside in possession is to do mitzvah there. Asher atem ovrim shama l'rishta, which you're going to go and you're going to inherit over there. Eilach u'mishpatim asher shemat tishmun lasot ba'aretz, you're going to guard them in the land. Asher notel Hashem Elokei evotecha lacha l'rishta, you receive as inheritance. Kol hayamim asher atem chayim ala adama, that you are on the land. Let's look at that Ramban I mentioned. It's a wild Ramban, right? And the Ramban wasn't a Zionist. There wasn't a Zionist at this point. There was only love Eretz Yisrael. Look at this. Read it inside. Says the Ramban. He's going to quote our pasuk, right? And it says, we know that if we sin, we get kicked out. The Torah tells us that in a number of places. Va'avartem me'ira, you'll be lost quickly. Afal pi she'ani megale otchem, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even though I remove you from the land, min ha'aretz, l'chutz ha'aretz, to outside of Israel, hayu mitztavinan v'mitzvot, you should keep doing mitzvot. Although the real natural habitat for the mitzvot is land of Israel, even says the Ramban, when you get kicked out of the land of Israel, you should keep doing the mitzvot. But the mitzvot for Israel, you just told me. I know I said that. But that's not the best place. Why? Lo ayu alechem chadashim, so that they shouldn't seem new to you. Mashal, let me give an analogy. La'adon, to a master, shekas al gets upset with his wife. V'shach levet aviyah, and kicks her out and she moves in with her parents again. That's not a natural home. A natural home is with her parents. Amala, he says to her, having mitkashetet tachshitim, I want you to keep wearing the jewels that I gave you, shekashetachzri, so that when you return, lo yu alecha chadashim, they won't seem new to you. The mitzvot are these jewels in the mashal, and although we're kicked out of the land of Israel, we keep doing them in chutz la'aretz, so that when we enter, and the Ramban actually believes this. He wouldn't say if he didn't, that the reward for the mitzvot is really in the land of Israel. However, it doesn't mean you're not rewarded for mitzvot you do in chutz la'aretz. He doesn't say that, right? But he says they're just tachshitim. Really, the reward for the mitzvot, really the optimal, I should say, place for the mitzvot is the land of Israel.
Even if there's no Beit HaMikdash, just in general? So then aren't we doing something wrong by not being there?
It's a good question. Let's look at the Pesach Tshuva. In our Ramban, the Ramban lists, not everyone does this. The Ramban is one of the few people that I know, I'm not such a big Talmid Chacham unfortunately, but he lists the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael as its own mitzvah, which he himself got to fulfill. He listed the mitzvah, one of the 630 mitzvot is Kvish Haaretz. It says you have to conquer the land. So what do they have to come to say? They talk about the Jews at the time of Yeshua have to go and conquer the land. The Ramban says no, that is a constant mitzvah. There are people today who still believe, right, that conquering the land of Israel is itself a mitzvah. So there's two ways to look at it. Either the mitzvah you do in Israel are mitzvah, and some say no, reside in the land itself is a mitzvah. How about those people that don't even believe in Torah? Did they get rewarded? Well, that's another discussion of do mitzvot need kavanah? Mitzvah tzricha kavanah. Do you know the answer to that question, by the way? What is the answer to the question of do you need to have kavanah to do a mitzvah?
No.
There's one quick answer for it, after a big discussion, which the rabbis go into great detail. If it's obvious you're doing it for a mitzvah, you don't need kavanah. For example, putting on tefillin. You should have kavanah. But if you don't have it, no one puts on leather straps on the left arm, right, in the morning, right, for fun, unless they're completely cuckoo, right? So therefore you're doing it for the mitzvah. But a mitzvah that can be done just regularly, not for mitzvah purpose, like walking the land of Israel, or living there, maybe you need kavanah for it. And by the way, the Gemara says, and the Rambam brings lahalacha, that every daled amot you walk in Israel is a mitzvah. Every 4 steps you take the land of Israel is a mitzvah. It's the Rambam. But you need to have kavanah because anyway, you walk around the land of Israel like it's another country. But it's not. Anyway, so the Ramban lists living in Israel as its own mitzvah. What's the pasuk? For which pasuk? V'yarashtem otam v'yashavtem ba. You'll inherit it, you're going to dwell on it. Devarim, Deuteronomy 11:21. The Ramban says Pesach Shuvah lists that as the mitzvah of living in Israel. And by the way, he did get to move to Israel at the end of his life. He further states that it is equal in gravity to all the mitzvot. Some mitzvot are equal to other mitzvot. Like Shabbat, for example, he says living in Israel is equal to other mitzvot. And it makes sense because you can do the mitzvah at a much higher level in the land of Israel. Right? And other people obviously say it's a great thing to live in the land of Israel. And this is the truth. Therefore, all times are equal concerning this mitzvah and applies even during the times of exile. So even now, according to the Ramban, because the Ramban was in Galut, Pesach Shuvah was agreeing, says being in the land of Israel is a tremendous mitzvah. So on what merit do we stand and live outside of Eretz Israel? Us religious, believing, God believing, mitzvah believing, Torah believing Jewish peeps. Not a simple answer. However, the rabbis tell us that there's a few reasons you're allowed to leave Eretz Israel. For Parnasa, for Torah, and Shidduchim. Yeah.
What does Torah mean?
To learn Torah. If you learn Torah better outside of Israel, with more menucha nefesh, with support, you're allowed to be outside of Eretz Israel. If your Parnasa, right, is going to be had better outside, you are allowed to leave Eretz Israel.
I feel like that's...
Or maybe you could say even remain outside of Eretz Israel.
So it's better...
It's not the ideal. Make no mistake, the natural habitat of the Jewish people is Eretz Yisrael. Now there's a lot of Gemarot that talk about the return to Eretz Yisrael and returning like Choma, like a wall of masses of people. But we're going to see when we get there, clearly, the Rambam's going to say this and many others. The Rambam, one of the signs Mashiach is coming is the return to Israel. And one of the jobs of Mashiach is to complete their return. As the prophet says, Mi'arba kanfot aretz, from the 4 corners of the earth. So we know that's coming. And it's happening right now. Yeah, for the first time in 2,000 years. So that's pretty epic. But it's not so simple. I don't know the real answer. I'm just telling you what the rabbis tell us. Yeah.
So if someone learns Torah outside of Israel,
Yeah.
and then they learn it in Israel, it's better to learn Torah in Israel?
1,000 times.
Like you get more merit for that?
Rav Dessler's going to bring down, we see that all your mitzvot are worth more than the land of Israel. Rav Dessler says that we're going to see that. I'll show you that inside. Absolutely. Torah is worth more in Eretz Yisrael. Yep.
Wait, the 3 reasons are like why you can leave, like for your whole
If they
life?
say to leave Eretz Yisrael for your whole life, that's a good question. But you're allowed to leave and live outside. Is Parnasa, Shidduchim. This is the 3 answers they're usually given, yeah.
Leaving means you like return.
To leave Israel.
So you have to start.
Well, I'm saying if the person is, I'm kind of learning out from that. If you're outside and you're going to do better outside. But in the end, these are not good answers. I can't lie to you.
So then why?
Nowadays, you can make a good Parnasa in Eretz Yisrael.
What does shidduchim mean either? like,
You can't find a marriage partner inside. You have to go outside to find a shidduch partner.
but Hashem will make a way, like,
You're a ba'alat emunah. I hear you, sister.
you know.
Shall make a way. Okay. I hear. But we have to act in this world like, that's where my mazal, my person's mazal, I don't know. I do know Hashem is the Shadchan. And he makes shidduchim outside of Eretz Yisrael and inside Eretz Yisrael. So I hear you. Okay, let's just finish it quickly, page 45. One last piece. Sifri says the land of Israel is equal to all the mitzvot. Okay? Equal to all of them. The Rambam says, actually, by the way, it's very important. We must, and we have always had, a small amount of people, Jewish people living in the land of Israel. The Rambam says if that weren't true, it says this in Sefer Mitzvot, right? We wouldn't have Judaism because the entire calendar would fall. Right? And you couldn't do any of the festivals at all. There always must be, and there always has been, even after the first Galut or the second Galut, it's always been a Jewish presence in the land of Israel. There must be. Without it, a lot of things are mavatel, are nullified. So there's always been. That's what the Gemara tells stories, right? The various Rabbanim were able to remain in the land of Israel even after the destruction of the temple. There's always been. You meet people, I've met people who go back 16 generations, 20 generations in Israel. Sometimes on the same property. Yeah.
I once learned, the three things that, I forgot what it's in, the book that, the three things that the world stands on,
Torah, Avodah, Gimelut Chasadim. Mishnah and Pirkei Avot. What about it?
So, a rabbi that I once had was saying that, Torah, at all times of the day, someone has to be learning Torah.
Yeah.
And so, that's why people live
outside of Eretz Yisrael, because different time frames, because if Torah wasn't being learned 24/7, as yeshivot actually, in Eretz Yisrael, they used to have in Europe as well, where Torah is being learned at 3 a.m, they used to do these mishmarim, different time scales, that someone's learning Torah the entire time. That's why Kadosh Baruch Hu created different time zones, so that at least Torah had always being learned somewhere. I've never seen that inside, but I heard the same thing. That's right.
Nice.
Very, very nice. Beautiful. Right? And that's why he even said the Gemara in Ketubot, walking 4 Amot, the land of Israel, you're guaranteed Ben or Bat Olam Haba. Pretty good. Pretty good.
You walk for an
Just walking 4 Amot to the land of Israel.
you're guaranteed a home.
Yeah. Pretty good, right?
Kavanah.
Kavanah. Okay, we'll finish this off next class. A last piece to do over there. And then we'll start to talk about Galut and then Mashiach.
Are your sins bigger there?
Yes, they're considered worse.